human life lasts only 50 years. Contrast human life with the life of Getten. It is but a very dream and illusion. Once they are given life from God, there is no such thing as don't perish. These lines are closely linked to Oda Nobunaga, one of the most famous Japanese people of all time, and the first of the three great unifiers, and the lines are said to be his favourite. Welcome to our first video in our mini-series on the life and wars of Oda Nobunaga. Do you want to command the armies of Oda Nobunaga? The sponsor of this video is a game called Yasuki Black Ronin, developed by Sengoku Games, and it allows you to do just that. This ultimate tactical RPG allows you to become the first foreign samurai in history, Yasuke, and command the forces of the daimyo Oda Nobunaga. Use your guile and skill to exploit the weakness in your opponent's tactics and win the battle. Yasuki Black Ronin makes use of elevation and directional attacks and defense, adding an extra layer of tactical complexity, making it similar to the classic of the genre, Final Fantasy Tactics. The growing number of warrior classes promises to open new strategies and ways to play and win. This turn-based strategy RPG will feature both a story mode that follows the adventures of Yasuke and a multiplayer mode allowing you to battle other players online. To learn more about the game, subscribe to the social media channels of Sengoku Games, the links are in the description. Sponsorships like this allow us to create more and better videos, so please support us and this indie developer. Wishlist the game in the Apple Store and Google Play Store via the link in the description. See you on the battlefields! Born in June 1534 at Nagoya, Nobunaga, or Kipposhi as was his child name, was the eldest legitimate son of his father, the so-called Tiger of Owari, Oda Nobuhide. While only 6 years old, he was made Lord of Nagoya Castle, with Nobuhide possibly wanting to inculcate the traits of independence and self-sufficiency to the young boy, who was destined to become the next leader of the Oda clan. However, and despite being the ruler of a castle, Kipposhi was still a child and would get into all kinds of mischief during his child and teenage years, like running around with peasant boys, while he was especially fond of wrestling and hawking. Such behaviour earned him the title of the Fool of Owari, and alienated many of his clan's retainers, who believed that he was ignoring his duties, which in turn led to a succession crisis. Nobunaga would have to spend almost a decade fighting against his brothers Nobuhiro and Nobuyuki, and his uncle Nobutomo to consolidate his leadership of the clan. At the same time, Owari and Nobunaga were threatened by external enemies, most important of which was Saito Yoshitatsu, the son of Nobunaga's father-in-law Saito Dosan, who ruled over the neighbouring Mino province. Yoshitatsu had risen to open rebellion in 1555, after he became aware that his father intended to name one of his other sons as heir. Although Oda troops were sent as aid, Dosan perished in battle, and Yoshitatsu became the new master of Mino. Thus Nobunaga was deprived of his most important ally. Nobunaga's greatest challenge, however, would come in 1560, when Imagawa Yoshimoto, one of the most powerful daimyo in all of Japan and the ruler of Suruga province, gathered an army of 25,000 men and marched towards Kyoto with the pretext of assisting the failing Ashikaga shogunate, while his true goal was to assume the title of shogun for himself, or at the very least, control the shogunate from the shadows. As the road to Kyoto passed through the province of Owari, one of Yoshimoto's side objectives was the subjugation of the area and his long-standing rival, the Oda clan. When news of Yoshimoto's approaching invasion force reached Nobunaga at Kyosu, he summoned a war council to decide upon the strategy he would follow. His senior retainers, scared of the enemy's numbers, advised the young warlord to stand fast and defend Kyosu Castle. Nobunaga remained so indifferent to the intelligence he had been delivered that some of his followers even started doubting his sanity. On the following day, however, the catatonic Nobunaga of the previous evening gave his place to a highly energetic general. He mustered his troops, around 2,000 Ashigaru, his samurai retinue, and a few horsemen. Unconcerned that he was going to face an enemy 12 times the size of his own army, the Oda daimyo famously chanted a few verses from the Etsumori, donned his armor while having breakfast, and then rode out of the castle with his small contingent to meet his enemy in the open battlefield. On the other hand, Imagawa Yoshimoto had made camp at the gorge of Dengaku Hazama and acted as if he'd already won the war, indulging himself in the head-viewing ceremony called Jiken. While Yoshimoto was busy congratulating himself for a war he had yet to win, Nobunaga's scouts, who by now had arrived near Okehazama, reported to him the location of the Imagawa camp. Knowing this was the opportunity he needed to win, Nobunaga acted quickly. He ordered his men to make straw scarecrows and dress them, as well as to place a large number of flags and banners to fool the Imagawa troops into thinking he had set up camp there. When this was done, he led his men around Nakajima Castle, using a dangerous route that passed through rice paddies that would leave them exposed to an enemy assault. However, luck was on Nobunaga's side, and the Oda troops reached their objective, a hill that overlooked the rear of Yoshimoto's encampment undetected. It was now afternoon, and the storm that had been gathering finally broke out. The downpour forced the Imagawa soldiers, most of them now drunk by celebrating all day, to return to their tents. Under the cover of the heavy rain and the sound of the thunderstorm, the Oda samurai and Ashigaru furiously charged the invaders, taking them completely by surprise. The ensuing melee was more of a slaughter than a battle, as the dazed and shocked Imagawa forces were unable to form any meaningful resistance. Hearing the commotion, Yoshimoto came out of his tent only to be immediately attacked by an Owari spearman named Hattori Kohita. The Shugo of Tsuruga was quick enough to dodge the Ashigaru's move, but not the one that came from a second attacker, a samurai called Mori Shinsuke, who managed to decapitate the Imagawa daimyo with a single strike of his sword. Yoshimoto's death was the final nail in the Imagawa army's coffin, which turned tail and was completely routed from the battlefield. The Imagawa forces in the vicinity promptly returned to Tsuruga, abandoning the Oda castles they had conquered just a few days before. Okehazama and Yoshimoto's death was the end for the Imagawa as a clan. His 22-year-old son and heir, Ujizane, was an aesthete and had little head for military thinking and strategy. Sensing his weakness, one of his vassals, a man named Matsudaira Motoyasu, prepared to switch sides and join the Oda cause under the rising star of Nobunaga, whose fame had now spread across all of Japan. The strategic location of Mino was so important that it was said whoever controlled it would rule Japan. It was natural then that Nobunaga's next goal would be the conquest of his neighboring province. When Yoshitetsu passed from illness in 1561, Nobunaga found the chance he needed to attack. The campaign to wrestle control of Mino from the son and heir of Yoshitetsu, Saito Tatsuoki, would last 6 long and bloody years. By convincing various Saito retainers to abandon him, and through the ingenious achievements of Kinoshita Tokichiro, the man who would later be known as Toyotomi Hideyoshi, at Tsunemata and at the siege of Inabayama Castle, Nobunaga managed to conquer Mino. He promptly transferred his seat to Inabayama, which he renamed Gifu, while also making a new seal with the inscription Tenkafubu, meaning rule the empire by force, thus unveiling his ambition to unify the land and the means by which he would achieve his dream. Following the conquest of Mino, Nobunaga sought to strengthen his position and to also acquire a clear path to Kyoto that would allow him to meddle with the politics of the Ashikaga shogunate. To that end, he arranged for his sister, Uichi, to marry the lord of Omi province, Azai Nagamasa. A year later, the opportunity to finally get involved in shogunate affairs and seize true power for himself revealed itself in the face of Ashikaga Yoshiaki. Yoshiaki was the brother of the murdered shogun Ashikaga Yoshiteru, and had come to Gifu to plead with Nobunaga to help him oust his brother's murderers and instate him as the ruling shogun. The only obstacle that stood between Nobunaga and Kyoto was the Rokkaku clan, which was defeated after the Lord of Owari launched a rapid attack against their castles. The war with the Rokkaku would continue until one of Nobunaga's most famous generals, Shibata Katsuie, would defeat them in 1570. But for now, the road to Kyoto was open. In November 1568, Nobunaga triumphantly entered Kyoto, expelled the Myoshu clan that had up to that point controlled the shogunate, and installed Yoshiaki as the 15th Ashikaga shogun. In a shrewd political maneuver, Nobunaga refused all titles the grateful Yoshiaki offered to him, realizing that accepting a title that would formally place him under the shogun would undermine his own power and show that he recognized Yoshiaki as his superior. In the following years, and as Nobunaga's power continued to grow, the relationship between the shogun and the Oda warlord would sour, and Yoshiaki would secretly form an anti-Nobunaga alliance. In 1570, wanting to demonstrate his unmatched political and military strength, and in an effort to weed out rival daimyos, Nobunaga pressed the new shogun to call on all the lords of the land to travel to Kyoto and attend a banquet. When the head of the Asakura clan, Yoshikage, refused, he was declared an enemy of the shogun and the emperor, and Nobunaga quickly raised a large contingent to attack Echizen and punish the insolent daimyo. Marching through Azai territory, he reached the Asakura domain and set siege to Kanagasaki. However, the tables would soon turn against the Oda, as Nagamasa declared war on his brother-in-law, deciding to honor instead his family's alliance with Asakura that was several generations old. The anti-Oda alliance grew, with the Rokkaku and various Iki sects joining forces with the Azai and the Asakura. With defeat imminent unless he acted fast, Nobunaga decided to retreat from Kanagasaki, but in July, he would launch another campaign, this time accompanied by his Tokugawa allies and targeting the home of the Azai, the castle of Odani. On the 30th of the same month, the combined Oda-Tokugawa forces met the Azai Asakura at Anigawa. Though the Azai troops managed to push the Oda back at first, the tide turned around thanks to the seasoned Mikawan soldiers of Tokugawa Ieyasu. The battle was a clear victory for the Oda-Tokugawa alliance, but it was inconclusive, so Nobunaga decided to not lay siege to Odani, and instead pulled back his forces. He would redirect his forces and his wrath against another enemy, the Iko-Iki, and the fabled warrior monks. The militant Buddhist monks, and especially those of Ishiyama Hongenji, would prove to be one of Nobunaga's toughest opponents. The Hangenji was the cathedral seat of the Iki, so to speak, and its temples were well protected by a large network of fortifications. Nobunaga's generals set siege to the temple complex in August of the same year. However, the siege would last for a decade, partly because of the strength of the fortifications, the determination and fighting prowess of the defenders, and partly because of the Mori clan of Aki, who used their superior naval forces to break the blockade and resupply the besieged monks by sea, until in 1577, Hashiba Hideyoshi managed to effectively cut off the supply route to Hongenji. While his generals were besieging the headquarters of the Iko-Iki, Nobunaga himself was leading campaigns elsewhere. In May 1571, he besieged the second greatest Iki stronghold, the fortress of Nagashima. The Oda samurai tried a frontal assault, but their horses became stuck in the mud of the river and the traps the monks had laid, tripping their riders over, who in turn became easy targets for the experienced Iki gunners. As if that wasn't enough, the defenders opened a dike and flooded the area, drowning many of the Oda troops and forcing Nobunaga to retreat. 4 months later, the Fool of Owari would earn himself another title, that of the Demon King. when he besieged and completely burned the monastery of Enryaku-ji on Mount Hiei, killing mercilessly the monks, women and children who were unable to escape. The ruthlessness Nobunaga demonstrated against the Buddhist monks would only earn him more enemies, as in 1572, the ruler of Kai province, Takeda Shingen, who was a devout Buddhist, would join the anti-Oda coalition. Urged by Shogun Yoshiaki's requests for aid, the Tiger of Kai, as Shingen was called, gathered his troops and marched towards Kyoto. His first obstacle was Nobunaga's trustworthy ally, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who suffered a crushing defeat at Mikatagahara in early 1573. Despite losing the battle, through the use of stratagems and night raids, which were led by the famous shinobi Hattori Hanzo, Ieyasu managed to fool Shingen into thinking that his army was still in fighting shape. Fearing a counterattack, the Takeda would retreat, and their threat would temporarily be neutralized as Shingen passed away 2 months later. With the threat of the Takeda now gone, Nobunaga decided it was time to tie up loose ends. He first targeted the Iki stronghold of Nagashima that resisted him 2 years earlier, and in July he attacked the militant monks once again. Once again, however, he would face defeat. Spurred by Nobunaga's second failure against the monks of Nagashima, Yoshiaki decided to rebel once more against his protector in the first week of August. This time, Nobunaga would not forgive the shogun for taking up arms against him. By the end of the month, the Ashikaga shogunate would be no more, as the Oda forces easily crushed those of Yoshiaki, who after surrendering shaved his head and became a monk until his death in 1597. Nobunaga had brought down the shogunate, but he would not follow the established practice of previous clans like the Miyoshi or the Matsunaga, who elected replacement shoguns and manipulated them behind the scenes. Instead, the Demon King would rule as the de facto shogun, despite not being able to formally acquire the title, as it was reserved only for those of Minamoto descent, whereas the Oda descended from the Taira clan. Losing no time after toppling the Ashikaga, Nobunaga gathered his army and marched north to settle the score with the Azai and Asakura clans. When Nagamasa realized the Oda army was approaching Odani, he sent a letter to Echizen asking for Yoshikage's assistance. The latter, after assembling his army at Ichijodani, marched through the mountain passes and encamped at Yanagase, just a few miles from both Odani Mountain and the Oda camp. However, the allied armies were unable to link up or coordinate their actions, much to Nobunaga's satisfaction. Seizing the great opportunity that had presented itself, the Oda warlord left a small contingent to continue the siege at Odani, and with the rest of his forces attacked the Asakura positions, soundly defeating them. Pressing on his advantage, Nobunaga pursued his retreating enemies all the way to Echizen, where he easily captured Ichijodani Castle. Yoshikage found refuge in a series of mountain temples, but was soon betrayed by one of his own clan members and was forced to commit seppuku. After placing his vassal, Meiba Nagatoshi, in charge of his newly conquered province, Nobunaga returned to Omi. Odani was a formidable fortification, but once again, Hashiba Hideyoshi proved himself a master of siege warfare. Seeing that the castle was about to fall to his enemies, Azai Nagamasa sent his wife and daughters to Nobunaga for safety. After all, not even the Demon King would harm his own sister. After saying his last farewell to his beloved Uichi, Nagamasa committed ritual suicide in the Flaming Keep. Nobunaga had once again triumphed, but this wasn't the end of his campaigns. His enemies were still many and still out there. The militant monks of Nagashima and Ishiyama Hongenji still defied him. The Takeda, despite Shingen's death, were still not defeated and were bound to return. To the northeast, in Echigo, Usugi Kenshin, the god of war as he was called, posed a serious threat, while in the west, in Chugoku, the mighty Mori ruled. If Nobunaga was to realize his dream of uniting all of Japan, he would have to conquer them as well. Next time, we're going to talk about Nobunaga's later years, his triumph over the Takeda at Nagashino, his clash with the Dragon of Echigo, the pacification of Iga, and his ultimate downfall at Honnoji. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible to make without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.